Hi, I'm Charlotte of Rarakoala, and I thought we'd move a bit away from hat talk and into conversation about writing things you may or may not know about gin. I'm here with my long-term drinks industry buddy, Jane Peyton. Well, I'll let her introduce herself, but to me, she's an enthusiastic writer, she's a crazy person in general, and founder of Beer Day Britain, involved a lot of gin things. And basically, my favourite part is I get lots of interesting facts that blow my mind whenever we bump into each other. So before we get into the whys, wherefores, and the interesting facts, I'll let you introduce yourself, Jane.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name's Jane Peyton, and I am the founder of the School of Booze, friend of Charlie's, and admirer of her beautiful hats and jewellery and all those wonderful creative things that she makes. And I'm very pleased to be here talking to you because on June the 12th, it's World Gin Day. Now, I have nothing to do with that apart from the fact that I do enjoy gin. So I'll tell you a little bit about the School of Booze. It's a alcoholic drinks consultancy, training organisation. I do corporate events, I write books, and I write for magazines and newspapers. So it's all sorts of things to do with alcohol. And last year I was commissioned by the British Library to write a book called The Philosophy of Gin. And it's a concise history of gin, fascinating to research and to write as well. And I know that Charlie's got a copy of this particular book. She liked all those facts. So lots and lots of facts.
I love facts.
Yeah, you love a fact. So it was very interesting learning about gin because gin is a drink that's very much associated with Britain, but like many things that are popular in Britain, it wasn't invented here in Britain. So it was adopted and changed and it evolved.
So it's going to have had some funny name before it was called gin then.
Yes, well, it actually came. I'm going to do a little bit of history now. So it was first introduced into England in 1688, and that's very precise, that date is, because that is the date when King William, well, he wasn't the king at the time, it was William of Orange, Prince William of Orange, which is in the area now known as the Netherlands. He was invited to take the throne, to become the king of England, because his wife had a claim on the throne. Now, they overthrew a Catholic king, James II. He was a crypto-Catholic, and England at that time was a Protestant country. So they needed a Protestant king who had a claim on the throne. And William of Orange did, being married to Mary, the daughter of James II. So he brought his national drink with him, which was a drink called Jenever. Now, because it's Dutch, it's actually spelt Genever, Genever, Geneva or Geneva, as we would say here. So the word gin actually comes from this corruption of this word Geneva, or the anglicized version of it. Now, Geneva was a spirituous drink. It was made from distilling wheat or corn or some sort of cereal, and it was flavored with juniper, caraway seeds, maybe aniseed, but it was much maltier than what we recognize gin is to be now. So that was the basis of what became gin. Now, a distilled drink made from juniper had been around for hundreds of years before then. Spirituous drinks, known as liquor in America, so alcoholic spirits, initially were delivery methods for medicinal herbs and spices. So if you dissolve medicinal herbs and spices in alcohol, they'll dissolve. They won't dissolve in water, but they will dissolve into alcohol. And then the body can absorb them by drinking the alcohol. So distilled spirits were not for recreation right at the beginning. They were there for medicine. So when you say just what the doctor ordered, it's actually true. So that's what Jenever was. It was a drink with lots of juniper in it, which has been a medicinal herb and a medicine for thousands of years.
Oh, so basically, you just thought that the alcohol would kill off the beneficial properties. I would have thought.
That's a really good point, because you drink it, you think, oh my goodness, that's so strong.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, it keeps them, it preserves them. Alcohol is a preservative, so it ends up preserving those medicinal herbs. And because it's alcohol, it goes into the blood system very quickly, because the blood system will absorb alcohol very quickly. So it turned out to be just a really useful thing for medicine.
Right, okay. So I don't feel much better after all the gin I drank last night.
You've just proved, in fact, it isn't medicine. No, it was the tonic, wasn't it? We've already discussed something in the tonic.
Tonic. I don't think tonic agrees with me.
Interesting. It could be true. Some people are allergic to certain things in drinks, and if it's proper tonic, what was it? A good tonic? Was it a premium tonic, or was it just rubbishy
tonic?
Could have been that then.
It could be that.
Yes.
I might get some scientists to look into it.
Go to SAGE. The SAGE group of scientists and ask if they want to have a go. They might be a bit bored with COVID.
So, I mean, are there any more facts going to, or do you want to talk about the gin day on the 12th?
I'll tell you more historic facts, actually.
Yes.
There's some fun stuff. I think people will be more interested in that, won't they? Yeah. So some more gin facts. When gin was first introduced into England in the late 17th century, there was a real religious schism in Europe. So it was the Protestant countries against the Catholic countries. And William of Orange had come over to take the throne of England as a Protestant king. His nemesis was Louis XIV of France. So he was always trying to pick a fight with Louis. The drink of France was brandy, or the distilled drink of France was brandy. There was a religious element and a religious fealty to what you drank. So if you were a Protestant and wanted to show your Protestant credentials, you wouldn't drink brandy because that was associated with Catholics, and vice versa. So the people who wanted to curry favour with the new king in England, basically the landowners, anybody who wanted favours from him, suddenly started drinking this Geneva stuff. And then it became distilled in London and in England, but it wasn't quite the same as this Geneva, because the Geneva was good quality. The stuff distilled in England wasn't. So it was really rough stuff, but it was encouraged to be distilled here. So the government gave out licenses that anybody could distill corn or wheat as long as it was gin. And the definition of gin, by the way, is a distilled spirit that's flavoured with juniper. That is the primary flavour of gin. It has to be juniper. Now, you could chuck anything else in, any other botanicals. Quite often, they'd put disgusting, horrible stuff in there, just rubbish, and sometimes poisons, sulfuric acid, and things that would intoxicate you, but just terrible, terrible stuff. They would put something called hogwash, which was it was basically the pig food. It was the food off the table that nobody, the rubbish, the peelings, the stuff that was going to be chucked, that would be given to pigs. Now, if you ferment that, you can get alcohol out of it, and it's called hogwash, which is where the term hogwash comes from. And they started making gin out of it. So you can see that gin was so poor quality in those days. Now, because everybody was distilling gin, it became very cheap. The price was cheap, and it was the quickest way to get trolleyed. Rather than lovely wholesome ale or beer, you drank gin because you wanted, if you were poor, you wanted to get out of your
mind.
Yeah, exactly. I knew there was a word for that.
Yeah, you can actually use any word you want, and people know what you want. I wanted to get wheelbarrowed.
No, in context, they just know exactly what you mean, don't they?
Yeah.
So people wanted to get wheelbarrowed, so they just drank gin because it was cheap and it got you where you wanted to go quicker. Usually killed you as well. Right. So this kicked off this thing called the gin craze, or the gin frenzy. For about 200 years, the underclass of England was basically alcoholic. Children were alcoholic. They were just addicted to gin, and it had a terrible effect on society. And if you're poor and you don't eat healthily and you have no health care, the worst thing you can do is drink loads of really strong alcohol because it's going to make you worse. But it's probably the best thing you can do because you have a horrible life anyway. So why not just get absolutely wheelbarrowed, and get out of it? And so it was a terrible devastation.
So is this when, like Mother's Ruin and Gin Lane comes in, or is this later on?
Yes. So in the 18th century, gin it was been known as gin by this point, or one of the first names actually was Madame Geneva, because that was another anglicised version of Geneva. So Madame Geneva gin. And she was intoxicating people. So gin actually had this imagery. It was a female imagery, and cartoonists and people artists, they would draw Madame Geneva as this old harridan, basically. She was never a beautiful young woman. She was always an old harridan. And then Gin Lane came along, and that was William Hogarth, who did 2 pieces of work. Most people will be familiar with Gin Lane. The devastation caused, the center of the picture is a drunken alcoholic mother with a baby in her arms, and she's so drunk she's dropped the baby, and the baby will die because it's going to fall down onto stone steps. Just terrible. And that actually was drawn in the area which is now St Giles's, or near Centrepoint in London, Tottenham Court Road.
Oh, I didn't realise it was an actual place.
Yes, you can see certain landmarks that are still there. Actually, there's a church in the background. You can see the spire of it. It's a very distinctive church. And that was a terrible slum, really, really awful slum. And so that was there. And then the companion piece was Beer Street, which was all healthy, wholesome, happy people, hardworking. And it was a social commentary of don't drink gin. It's terrible. It's bad for you. It's bad for society. Drink beer, the honest drink of the working man and woman, because it's good for you.
Yeah, I've seen that one as well. So it's exactly the same street, isn't it? But like the shops that so like the pawn merchant I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. It might even be a pub or something instead. And,
yes. Yes, exactly. So in Gin Lane, the only person who's making any money is the pawnbroker, not PORN, PAWN, so people pawning their goods. Yeah. He's doing really well. And then in Beer Lane, the only person who isn't doing well is the pawnbroker, and he's actually hung himself. So you see him you have to look really closely to see that he's actually hanging there. Brown bread is deed.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Yeah, I didn't notice. Yeah. There's a lot going on in these 2 images. There's a lot to see.
Yes. Do you want to know more about some of the first cocktails? Because they were born on the high seas.
Yeah. Oh gosh, really?
Yes. So 2 of the first cocktails that we still drink actually were initially medicinal. Pink gin. I don't mean gin that is now pink in colour, and that is a thing now. It's either got colouring in it or it's got strawberries or raspberries, so it's actually pink in colour. But there's a cocktail called pink gin, and it's gin with bitters, so things like Angostora's bitters, and it gives it a slight tinge, so it's pink-ish, but it's not pink as it's not fuchsia, it's just a tinge. Now, Angostora's bitters were first marketed in a port town in Venezuela called Angostoras, and they were thought to prevent seasickness. So the mariners, and these are mariners, international mariners going all over the world, on the British ships, which carried gin aboard them, some of them, people go, why the heck did they have gin or rum or whiskey or spirits on board? Because alcoholic spirits are medicine, they're painkillers, they're sterilants, and they're antiseptic, and they'll knock you out. If you need some sort of medical treatment that's going to, I don't know, cut your leg off because it's been damaged by a cannonball, you're going to drink some spirits to knock you out and kill the pain while they're doing that. Now, if those ships had gin on board, the officers started adding this bitters, Angostora's bitters. So pink gin was basically a drink to try and prevent seasickness.
Okay.
Now it's a cocktail. The other one is a gimlet, and gimlets are still very popular. Gimlets are gin with lime juice. And lime juice was carried on board ships because it was vitamin C to prevent scurvy. Now, scurvy was an absolute scourge of the Royal Navy or any travellers, any naval forces, because it actually, scurvy killed more people than all the wars put together that England or Britain fought. It was a terrible, terrible loss of life with scurvy. So when they discovered that vitamin C could prevent it, then woohoo, the ship started carrying limes or lemons, so juice. And every day the sailors had to have their little ration of lime juice, and they were also allowed to have a little ration of alcohol as well. So somebody just put the two together and it became the gimlet. Now, they don't know whether the name gimlet comes from the fact that the implement that you would make a hole in your wooden barrel of lime juice was known as a gimlet. It was like a screwdriver sort of thing, or whether it was named after Sir Thomas Gimlet, who was the Surgeon General of the Navy at the time. But whatever it is, it's a cocktail that was
could
still...
be either of those, couldn't it? Absolutely.
Yes. And then, of course, gin and tonic, the most famous cocktail in the world and the easiest one to make. That originally came about because tonic water contained the bark of a tree, the cinchona tree, and the bark of the tree contains quinine, which is something to fight malaria with. It's a medicinal thing. It's prophylactic for malaria. So
I thought, I know it settles your stomach, doesn't it? But I didn't realise about the malaria. Oh.
Yes, but it has to be, it can't just be, flavour of, it has to have the active ingredient from the bark, the cinchona bark, and quinine. So that was a medicinal thing, a magic medicinal thing for any malaria-ridden countries. And in some countries, they had gin, the colonists. So it was just a question of, oh, it's really bitter, that horrible tonic is with that cinchona bark. So they added some gin in to try and make it a bit more palatable.
Oh, so that came first and the gin's added after. It wasn't like I'd got gin and it's really strong, I'll add in the tonic water to like calm it down.
No, it was the other way around.
Okay.
And then when tonic water, carbonated tonic water came about, that was in the late 18th century. Joseph Priestley, a chemist from Bradford, found a way of injecting carbon dioxide into water to give it a sparkle. And then somebody added, oh, let's add some quinine or some cinchona bark into it. And that's when it became tonic water. And it's still widely known as Indian tonic water.
I did wonder why it's always Indian. Yeah.
Yeah, and then a Swiss guy, I think he was a chemist as well, but he was called Jacob Schwepp, and he really marketed this Indian tonic water. And it's nowadays, I mean, Schweppes is just absolutely associated with tonic water, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
G&T. So not very good tonic though. I mean, the best tonic is the stuff like Fever Tree or Fentimans or those proper made ones that are properly made with full ingredients.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's all sorts of styles of tonic water now, like, flavours and all sorts out there. So you can pretty much just have an endless menu, can't you, of these different gins and the tonics as well.
And the tonics, those flavours are often recommended to have with certain gins because not all gin has the same recipe of botanicals in them. So some gins have got a more herbaceous flavour note to them, in which case you might want to have a gin that has some sage in it or some sort of herbs, maybe some cucumber, and that's going to enhance the botanicals in your gin. Whereas if you've got a gin where its dominant flavour after juniper is always the dominant flavour, but the second dominant one would be a botanical, for instance, a citrus, a lime or a lemon, in which case you'd want a Sicilian orange tonic water, for instance, and it's going to spike those flavours in your gin. Now, if you think about it, a gin and tonic, 75% of your G&T is the tea. And you're actually going to taste the tea more than you're probably going to taste the gin. So you want to have a quality gin, a quality tonic. You don't want to have cheap, rubbishy tonic because it's going to spoil your gin.
Yeah, makes sense. So I know that you said that gin has to contain juniper to be classed as gin.
Yes.
Are there like regulations where it has to be real botanicals, or are people just sticking flavours in, or?
There are no laws about that. The only law, the legal requirement, is a style of gin called London dry gin. And that does have stipulations that the only thing you can add into a London dry gin after it's been distilled is water. Now, all gin is diluted because it comes out of the still as maybe 80% of alcohol, and you don't want that. You want to dilute it down to 40%, or if it's a naval strength, 57 or 56, or just under 40. So it can't have any sugars or any flavorings added after it's been distilled, apart from water. The only addition is water, and that's a legal requirement for London dry gin.
Oh, okay.
Now, some cheap distillers, it might be supermarket owned brands or just like really generic ones, they might put flavors in. They might just like not real botanicals, but you can tell when you're drinking a good gin for sure.
Yeah.
And if it's a premium gin, they're not going to risk putting rubbishy things in, because the only thing that a gin distiller has to market their gin is the botanicals.
Yeah.
Because basically gin is a flavorless spirit that's flavored with botanicals. Now, most distillers in this country, probably in the world actually, they're not actually distillers, they're known as rectifiers, because they buy bulk spirit that's been made in industrial quantities with no flavor whatsoever. It's a spirit that's been distilled from wheat or barley or potatoes or rice or grapes. You can make it from anything at all, but it will have no flavor whatsoever. And then they redistill it with a basket of botanicals to their recipe. So they're not actually making the real distillate, it's called. There's only about 8 or 9 distilleries. Adnams is one of them. They make their gin and vodka out of the beer. What's the one in Chatham? Copper Rivet. They make it as well. Very rare that a distillery will actually, a gin distillery will actually make its own spirit.
Yeah, I've heard, and a lot of brewers are making, like you said, Adnams. Now, a lot of brewers are now making gin. And some of the guys I've met, and they've been saying, like Canterbury Foundry Brewery, they've got this Japanese, I'm not even going to attempt to say what it is, but yeah, Japanese botanical that they've put in it, and he's like, yeah, you won't find this in another gin. And so they do, as you said, it's not flavorings, it's actual botanicals.
But it seems there's no end to the gin sector growing and growing. It's gone mad in the last 10 years, and it's really exciting. And people go to gin caves and gin cellars and gin schools, and they get all about the G&T or the cocktails.
I like it because it's with other drinks that we'll talk about like in the future, but with gin, it makes it a drinking experience. Like you just said, but you go to the bar, and I remember back in my day when I started drinking a long time ago, you went to the bar and it was literally like a gin and tonic, a vodka and lemonade, a Carlin. There was not much choice, and it wasn't very exciting. You were drinking to get drunk, and that's it. So now it
would be a Gordon's, wouldn't it? A Gordon's ice and a slice,
Yeah.
One
but
little
now
cube of
it's
ice.
Not like you don't go out necessarily. Well, I don't necessarily go out to get drunk, but you enjoy the different tastes and the experience, different glassware, like with the cocktails, all the different cocktails, and the way they mix it up. Yeah, it's good. Yeah,
it's very exciting times, and we need to thank Bombay Sapphire for this renaissance in gin, because they introduced Bombay Sapphire was a brand that was launched in the 1980s, and by that point, for about 20 years previously, gin was just old-fashioned. It was what your mum and dad or your granny might drink. It was really suburban and pedestrian. It was Abigail's party, it was Margot and thingy, to the manor ball. It was the golf club. It was just tacky. And do you know who made it tacky? Well, not single-handedly. Dr. No, the James Bond film.
Yeah.
In the 1960s, it was the first James Bond film. In the book, James Bond drank martinis made with gin.
Right.
In the film, he ordered a martini made with vodka.
Yes. he
So
does.
almost immediately people thought, new thing, gin, passé.
I didn't
So
realise
Bombay
that.
Sapphire came along. It was the first gin that had been reintroduced for, or launched for decades actually. And it was very chic, the bottle was. The branding was really chic. It had this fake Indian connection, you know, Queen Victoria, Bombay. It was named after this sapphire, the biggest sapphire ever found. So it had all these credentials like that, but it was chic. And really importantly, its taste wasn't too heavy on the juniper, because up till that point, vodka was the spirit, and vodka has very little flavour, if none at all. So they didn't want to scare people by giving them too much juniper. So it's very light and easy to drink. And because it was so chic, the early adopters took on, and it's like, oh yes, and yeah, and the branding was fab, and they took these adverts out, and it was there on the back bar of
Yeah,
cocktail
shot blue, all blue.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
beautiful,
I'll have
absolutely
that
beautiful.
blue one, please. Yeah.
Yes. We'll have the Bombay Sapphire, thank you. And then the 80s came along, and the 90s, and the yuppies, and all this and that. Now, really importantly, the biggest thing that happened for Britain in particular was a change in the law that you could make spirit, distilled spirit, in much smaller batches. So there was this law that you had to make it in 1,000 hectolitres. Well, no small boutique brand could do that because they wouldn't be able to sell it, or they wouldn't have the customers. So there was a campaign by Sip Smith, which is now owned by, I think, Suntory, the Japanese company, but it was a tiny boutique startup distillery in London. And then Chase Distillery of the Tyrrell's Crisp fame, not owned by them anymore, I don't think. And they lobbied to have the law changed. So the government finally went, oh, all right then. So then you could make just really small batches of gin, and vodka as well. And that is when gin really took off, because these tiny little brands started to be available. And that was it. So that was a massive.
Yeah, the bars are just packed. Some
Yeah.
bars are packed with different bottles and brands now. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yes.
So 12th of June then, what's happening?
Well, World Gin Day was just started by a British woman, and basically it's drink gin. It's drink gin, drink cocktails, celebrate gin, learn about it, have a nice menu of cocktails if you've got a bar, social media, just get people revved up.
Okay.
A little bit like Beer Day Britain, which is on June the 15th.
I'll talk to you about that.
Yes. Anyway,
yes.
the philosophy of gin, £10 makes a really good gift. Signed copies from my website. And you have the book as well. I know that, Charlotte. You are a very loyal customer. And look, it's got a picture of Gin Lane in it. It's so familiar to people anyway. Yeah. It's really well. So yes, it's easy reading. It's 100 pages. There's cocktail recipes, and it's very useful. And I'll just quickly talk about Prohibition in America.
Okay.
Bathtub gin. So Prohibition started in 1919, and it was called the Noble Experiment to try and ban people from drinking alcohol. Now, it was sort of a half-hearted law because they never decriminalized alcohol, drinking it. They only decriminalized making it, transporting it, and marketing it, and what have you. But they didn't decriminalize drinking it because that would have criminalized communion wine.
Okay.
So, and then eventually, they did start busting people for drinking alcohol. So it was just a bit of an odd law, really. But what it did, it basically criminalized alcoholic drinks and the legal sale of them, which meant that gangsters and the mafia and criminal gangs filled the void. And this is where all this criminality and mafia really started, in all these bootleggers. Bathtub gin was a thing that was made, and it was probably not made in a bathtub, but it was bottled in really large bottles that were too big to go in your sink, because you had to fill them with water as well. So they put them in the bathtub and filled them up with water.
Right, okay.
Now, bathtub gin is a euphemism for really poor quality gin. There was industrial spirit being made still. It was necessary for industry, for pharmaceuticals, for all sorts of things, for farming, agriculture. So you did need alcohol. And so what the government insisted was that it was denatured. So they added something really poisonous to it. If you drank it, you'd probably die, to stop people drinking it. Well, of course, people did drink it and people died. And so there were these chemists hired by the bootleggers to take away this poisonous thing and make it palatable. Now, this is why cocktails became really popular. They already existed in America, but one of the reasons that they became really popular was to mask the taste of this really terrible quality gin that was just basically flavored this poisonous alcohol spirit.
Wow.
So,
I didn't know that. And I was actually hoping that the bathtub gin was made in a bathtub. Obviously not one that you use, but I thought it was quite a quirky notion.
I know, maybe some people did.
Yeah.
Or maybe you could do it. Maybe you could do it.
Yeah. I don't.
Bathtub gin. No, you like your quality gin, don't you?
Yes. Yeah, I do. So, yeah, were there any other things you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we've sort of covered it, Jim. We've had a little gallop through gin, haven't we?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you ever so much for that. That's brilliant and really informative.
My pleasure. So World Gin Day, June the 12th.
Okay.
Hope you enjoy your G&Ts. And just again,
a bit of a plug of the book. You go for it.
Pluggy.
So the website's School of Booze, isn't it?
Yes, so just put School of Booze in a search engine and it comes up. I do have a shop on that website. So signed copies through the website, also available through the British Library website and bookshops, independent bookshops. I'm not going to mention the shop named after a forest because they're evil.
Yeah, don't say that. I'll take us all down. Yes. Okay, brilliant. And then I'll speak to you about beer then next time. Yes. That'll be good as well. And I think people think they don't like beer or they're not interested in beer, but actually that's like another whole new world.
Oh, isn't it? Because I find that a lot of people will say to me, oh, don't drink beer. And I'll say, why? Oh, it's too bitter. And I'll say, but not all beers are bitter. But they think they are. What to them, beer is a pint of Doom Bar or a pint of bitter that they've once tasted when they were 14 and they didn't like the taste of it and they've never moved on. Yeah. To them, that's beer. Absolutely. You know, if they could taste a Belgian sour beer, they wouldn't believe it was beer. Or if they tasted a wheat beer, not bitter at all. And, you know, the Belgian fruit beers as well, not bitter. I know we're not talking about beer, but I'll just say this now. But I used to do a lot of it was actually at the Ideal Home exhibition. They had a food and drink theatre. And so you'd get people at the Ideal Home exhibition just coming in, sitting down, having a few samples of a bit of food, a bit of this. There was always speakers. So I was one of the speakers. So we'd have a beer tasting and taste 3 different beers. And it was usually a lot of women who were in the audience. And I'd always ask them, are there any non-beer drinkers here? Put the hand up. What's your reason for not drinking beer? Pardon me. There was always 2 reasons. It's too bitter and it's highly calorific. Well, both of those are not true. Beer is not highly calorific. When you compare it to other things, it's in fact measure for measure. It has fewer calories than any other alcoholic drink, measure for measure. And it's not particularly calorific. And not all beer is bitter. So we'd have our beers. Maybe we'd have a mild, maybe a bitter, and an India Pale Ale, IPA. Of those, the IPA was the most bitter flavored. And then at the end of our tasting, I'd say, so did you like any of the beers? The people who said they didn't like beer, did you like any of them? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I like that last one a lot. It was the IPA, the most bitter one of all 3 of them. So it's not bitterness, it's the type of bitterness. Because I always say to them, do you drink tea? Do you drink coffee? Do you eat rocket? Do you like grapefruit juice? Do you like gin and tonic? Yes to all of them. So then I'd say, so it's not bitterness. It's a perception of beer that is one of the reasons people just seem to have a block. And if they'd only, you know, blind taste things or give it a try. They might find that they do actually like it.
Education as well, which we're going to solve with you in the next episode. Yes.
Episode, it's like a series.
Rarakoala
We're
TV.
binging. We're going to binge on these episodes, aren't we?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you again, and I shall speak to you soon.
Yeah,
Thank
bye
everyone for
everybody who's watching.
Bye.
Bye-bye.